Russian army losses have, for the first time, outpaced its mobilization. This was stated by Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrskyi in an interview with Le Monde. According to him, despite continuous conscription, the enemy cannot replenish shattered units amid intense fighting.
Even though in 2025 they managed to mobilize and conscript 406,000 people into military service, their total losses, including both the killed and the wounded, amounted to about 418,000 soldiers. This was reported by Oleksandr Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Joining us is Serhii Bratchuk, military expert and spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army. Serhii, morning.
Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes, hello.
Glory to the heroes. How do you evaluate the significance of this Rubicon that we have crossed at this point in the Russian-Ukrainian war, especially now when Russian losses at the front are no longer being sufficiently compensated by their current recruitment and mobilization system? What exactly does this mean for what the combat operations might look like in the year 2026?
Well, in fact, let's hope that the enemy will not be able to break this trend and that it will turn into a real tendency that will directly influence the course of combat operations. Even today, we can already see that the intensity of combat operations in various directions, from the northern Slobodansky sector all the way to the Pridniprovsky sector, despite the fact that the number of engagements varies, of course, in these directions and on different sections of the front. In any case, the enemy's offensive impulses are feeling this shortage. They are feeling this shortage of personnel. It is becoming increasingly difficult to compensate for this. And in fact, if the Russians continue to be eliminated at this rate, and let me remind you, this is one of the main objectives of the strategic defensive operation for our defense forces, then it is clear that the Russians are facing the choice of declaring a full mobilization. On the other hand, even if this factor of full mobilization is announced and all Russians are forced to go to the front, it's clear that it's questionable whether they'll actually be able to send everyone, because the quality of personnel training today is also lacking. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi didn't say for nothing that, as you can see, it's becoming increasingly difficult for the Russians to do this, and accordingly, they are rushing to replenish these losses. With whom are they replenishing them? With people who are untrained. So we will see how it begins, and there is already a lot of preparation underway, as well as a major regrouping of Russian troops. This next stage of the Russian strategic offensive operation will take place specifically in the spring. I truly believe that within just a few weeks, we will already see that it is not just very difficult for the enemy to compensate for their losses, but virtually impossible.
The first, or so-called partial mobilization, which Vladimir Putin announced in 2022, became, speaking subjectively, the biggest political challenge for the Russian regime in terms of public sentiment during the entire period of the full-scale invasion. So, from your professional perspective, will Putin actually dare to proceed, Komikos, considering that the potential risks have quite clearly and significantly escalated? Since the longer the fighting drags on, it is becoming increasingly clear that the general sentiment and overall mood of the Russian population in this regard is not becoming any more positive. In your expert opinion, will the risk of losing initiative and momentum at the front outweigh the internal domestic political risks and potential instability for Putin?
Well, to be honest, I personally don't count on any kind of Russian coup or, as they say, a popular uprising. If we use the specific Russian terminology, consequently, even today, you see, they still appeal directly to Putin saying that everything is very bad, but they still go to die for him. It is quite obvious that the forms of mobilization that exist in Russia today essentially repeat the same full mobilization that we talk about so much nowadays, both here and all around the world. Will Putin dare to go through with it? I believe that only one specific thing could compel Putin to announce a full nationwide military mobilization. And the only factor that influences whether this is even discussed is his own security. If he does not feel, and in my opinion, as of now, he still does not feel any threats, let's say, to his personal safety, then such a full mobilization is quite likely to be announced. Looking at it from a different perspective, we see that Vladimir Putin and his military command still live in some kind of distorted parallel world. Accordingly, they consider what is happening today on the battlefield to be, well, at the very least, a success for the Russian Federation, that it is making progress. Russia is indeed making moves on the tactical level, but what specific losses are they actually suffering? We have, in fact, already talked about this. I think that the Russian command simply does not feel this yet, although the situation on the front in some directions is, let's say, not very favorable for them. Let's just take a closer look, for example, at the Zaporizhzhia front.
Regarding today's massive overnight shelling, it's clear that for the Russians it's important not only to create pressure and to deliberately foster the strategic impression that they have enough resources to continuously and relentlessly maintain this level of pressure, and to launch new large-scale offensive campaigns every year, thereby convincing in particular our Western allies that Russia is indeed ready to achieve what they call the goals of the special military operation, completely irrespective of the level of losses. I suspect that if they fail to replenish their losses at the front and maintain this pressure in reality, they may resort to other tools, in particular intensifying missile and drone terror against Ukrainian cities. From your professional perspective, do they currently have enough resources to compensate for potential problems at the front by intensifying their missile and drone strikes as of today?
You know, in this regard, a certain answer to this question could be the strikes that in particular took place on the territory of the Udmurt Republic, where that very critical plant for the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation is located. This plant produces, I believe, the largest range of all Russian missiles that are considered modern by the Russian authorities, and accordingly, the most dangerous ones. That is, we're talking about the Yars, the Oreshnik, the Iskanders, and accordingly the Topol missiles. So, as you can see, the most threatening range of Russian missiles was produced right here. And today our answer is the Flamingo missiles. There's a lot that can be said about what was achieved and what in particular was not achieved. Well, it's kind of our national pastime to say, well, this didn't work out. In my opinion, there are a few key points. First of all, the long distance that Ukrainian missiles traveled, this was officially reported. That is, it was necessary to bypass the air defense system of the Russian Federation. And in fact, this was accomplished. And the strikes, there are already satellite images today that confirm at least 2 hits on 2 workshops. These are the 22nd and the 36th. And the diameter of that hole, to put it mildly, a hole, indicates that the missile was quite powerful. So today, this is our response, and it is a response that will truly reduce the enemy's missile resources. At this current moment, yes, it is still very substantial. But on the other hand, let's take a look at even today's shelling and the weaponry that Russia has been using. Yes, Shaheds and Garans were used on a massive scale. Accordingly, this is also a challenge for us that we need to neutralize as much as possible. The defense forces are working on this. And on the other hand, the range of missiles that are constantly being used, yes, there is an emphasis on ballistic missiles, ballistics, and it's clear why. They are the most threatening missile weapons for us. As for everything else, it really seems like, as they often say, whatever is currently at hand, they gather it up as quickly as possible and start attacking with it. So these are certainly very clear signs. I won't make any announcements in advance, but there are certain signs that things aren't going very well economically in Russia either. And we are now considering these economic matters specifically in the context of the military-industrial complex. Therefore, I think that our responses, as I have already mentioned, are our missile projects, specifically Ukrainian ones, and our strikes on Russian capabilities within the territory of the Russian Federation. And in fact, what directly affects the front are the strikes on the temporarily occupied territories near the front line. Today, this is also happening every day and has a direct impact on the intensity of the fighting.